So this is the Oppo Find N5, and while this might not be the perfect foldable, this is hands down one of the best and thinnest foldable that I've used. Let me tell you why. So just like most of my reviews on this channel, let's talk about the Oppo Find N5's specs real quick. The Oppo Find N5 is using the all-new Snapdragon 8 Elite, so this is a true flagship foldable through and through. Besides that, it has 16 gigs of RAM, 512 gigs of storage, and we're also getting a 5,600 milliamp hour battery, which is a silicon carbon battery, which means they're able to fit a bigger capacity battery on a foldable this thin. And I think this is also the biggest battery on a foldable at this scale, which is just insane. Now, besides the internals, on the outside, you can clearly see how thin this new Fold really is. It's only 8.93 millimeters thin when it's closed and 4.21 millimeters thin when it's open, and that's not including the camera bump. Now, the cameras do protrude a little bit here since the device is so thin, and basically think of the Oppo Find X8's camera, but just a bit worse, and we'll talk more about the cameras later in the video. Besides that, the Find N5 is also IPX6, IPX8, and IPX9 rated, which basically just means that the phone can be submerged and it can endure high pressure and high temperature water jets. Now, unlike the OnePlus Open or Oppo Find N3, the form factor on this new Find N5 has changed quite a bit. Besides how thin it is, the device itself actually got a little bit taller, so we now have a 6.6-inch cover display, and the inner display is now a massive 8.12-inch inner display, which is only a couple inches smaller than Apple's iPad mini. Now, both cover and inner displays are still OLED, LTPO 120Hz, so everything looks super nice, very smooth, and they get plenty bright too for outdoor usage. Now, the thing I don't love about this new form factor though is the fact that the volume buttons and the lock fingerprint sensor is way too high on this phone. It just feels unnatural to hold, and you'll definitely need some time to get used to this. All right, now back to the displays real quick. In my opinion, the inner display is probably where things get special because when Oppo teased the Find N5 and showing that it barely has a crease compared to what I think was the Fold 6 from Samsung, it actually looked like there's no crease in the middle. And while that is kind of true, you'll still see a little bit of crease in certain lighting conditions, but also when you swipe your fingers across the middle of the screen, you'll still feel a little bit of that crease there, but it's nowhere near as bad as Samsung's Fold 6. So if you want to see and feel what the future is going to be like for foldable phones, Oppo's setting a pretty nice standard here. Now, in terms of performance, this is running a Snapdragon 8 Elite chip, which is missing one extra core, so this has 7 cores versus 8, but it is still incredibly fast and efficient. And compared to the S25 Ultra and OnePlus 13, which is running, the regular 8 Elite chip, we can see from Geekbench 6 that the Find N5 is just a tad bit slower than the other two phones in terms of Geekbench scores. But honestly, in terms of day-to-day usage, whether you're playing games or you have multiple apps open at once, everything is smooth like butter. Overall, I'm really impressed by its performance and efficiency. And in terms of the games that I played and how thermals have been, Genshin Impact and Diablo Immortal, which are two of my usual go-to games, here both look amazing on this big inner display. It was a little bit weird playing on such a thin device and was low-key scared for its thermals, but you know what, surprisingly, thermals were actually pretty decent. I didn't really notice the phone to get super hot to the touch, but it can get warm about 30 to 45 minutes in. Now, it wasn't to the point where I couldn't use the phone, but it's also a good sign that I didn't notice any slowdowns or dip in frame rate, and especially when I'm switching apps. And then when it comes to software, the phone ships with ColorOS 15, and it feels and looks just like the Find X8 series or the OnePlus 13. So that means it's very snappy, customizable, and still offers what I think is the best multitasking feature on a foldable, because compared to the Z Fold 6 that has your basic 2 panels and a floating window, here on the Find N5 you can actually have 2 apps side by side and 1 big panel as the 3rd panel, which is perfect for something like having Instagram and Threads side by side vertically, and then having YouTube as the 3rd panel taking up the entire screen. Besides that though, there isn't really anything new here on the phone in terms of multitasking or overall features, but there is this new O+ Connect app for the Mac, and it's kind of cool, and I don't really know how they're able to pull this off. So basically, once you download the O Plus Connect app for the Mac and connect it to the same Wi-Fi network as your Find N5, you can seamlessly access and manage your photos, videos, files all on your Mac. So this makes transferring files back and forth to my Mac a lot easier now. But that's not everything. You can even remote access your Mac right from your Find N5 and control your Mac when you put the phone in flex form mode, and that'll automatically turn the bottom half of your phone into a trackpad or keyboard, which is kind of cool. Now, this feature, at least at the time of making this video, is exclusive to the Find N5, so I'm not really sure if that's coming to the Find X8 series. But right now, controlling your Mac is still a little bit buggy, but transferring files back and forth between the phone and the Mac seems to work pretty well. Okay, now in terms of battery life, I've only had the phone for about 10 days, and honestly, it's been pretty good. I think the bigger 5600 milliamp hour battery here on the Oppo Find N5 is proving that whether you're a big display user or prefer to use the cover display, you won't run into any problems in terms of the phone running out of juice. I'm getting about 6.5 hours of screen on time over the last few days on average, and with the 80-watt wired charging, it's pretty nice to have that super fast charging available whenever I need a quick juice. Now, what's even better is that the Find N5 finally has wireless charging, and it's also Qi 2 compatible as long as you have a case that supports magnetic charging, but it does support 50-watt fast wireless charging, which is awesome. All right, now let's talk about the camera module on the back of this Fold. So the Oppo Find N5 is obviously incredibly thin, and I actually have no idea what Oppo was thinking here, but it's like they're taking 5 steps forward in innovation and 10 steps back when it comes to its cameras on this Fold. The Find N3 or OnePlus Open packed incredible camera hardware for a Fold, and I actually loved how versatile the camera system was. Now, due to this having a thinner design, they actually had to make some compromises. And while we still have two 50 megapixel cameras for the main camera and the 3x zoom camera, the ultra-wide unfortunately got a major downgrade at 8 megapixels versus the, I think, 64 megapixel or 48 megapixel camera on the Find N3. Now, all sensors, including the main and telephoto, did get a downgrade in sensor size as well, so that's kind of a bummer. Now, over the course of the 10 days that I've had the phone, I did have to install an update or two, which did tune the cameras a bit, but nothing too drastic in terms of photo quality. So what you guys see in the sample photos are all shot with the latest software updates. So with that being said, in ideal lighting, no matter what focal length you shoot in, whether it's the main 1x, the ultra wide, or 3x telephoto camera, I think in ideal lighting, when it's very sunny outside, everything looks good. It's very much like an Oppo device with that Hasselblad tuning, and everything kind of looks a bit artsy, but still pretty color accurate with just the right amount of contrast in every photo. Now, without comparing it directly to the Find N3 or OnePlus Open, I think the main camera is fine for most things, but the 3x sensor is the best sensor out of the camera system that's in this Fold. It has somewhat of a tele macro lens, which means you can get pretty close to your subject and get nice natural bokeh out of the camera without using portrait mode. And the ultra wide, unfortunately, just doesn't look all that great out of the camera because of that downgrade in resolution and sensor. So trying to shoot ultra wide in less ideal lighting is going to look like trash. Oh, and one last thing about the cameras, just like the Find X8 series, the Find N5 is also capable of shooting really quick burst photos, which is pretty useful if you love shooting pets or your kids running around. And yeah, that's the Oppo Find N5. It's the thinnest foldable phone that I've ever used, and it definitely feels futuristic in a way. I just hope that brands stop it here, because any thinner, it just leads to a lot more compromises on other things such as the camera. I do think this phone is miles better than the Samsung Z Fold 6, and I guess we'll just have to see what Samsung's gonna come out with later this year, and if it can really compete with Oppo. Otherwise, if you wanna experience a really cool Fold that is, this thin, that has an awesome inner display, that has decent cameras, and features the latest SoC from Qualcomm, I think you should really look into this phone. If not, then the Find N3 or OnePlus Open is still a very good Fold that, I can recommend to just about everyone.